I'm Roberto Baldwin, and this is Tomorrow Today's Sustainable Mobility Brief. The transportation world is evolving at a rate not seen in decades. The transition from fossil fuels to sustainable energy has brought with it some truly exciting opportunities, but also some confusion. I'll sift through the noise and share quick updates on the latest news, trends, and advancements that will impact our world for years to come. This week on the Tomorrow Today Briefs podcast, we have Guidehouse Insight's Principal Research Analyst into e-mobility, Sam Abuelsamid. Sam, thank you so much for being on the show today. I really appreciate it. Sam and I have been, we're on another podcast together.
Yeah, we do the Wheel Bearings podcast every week.
Yeah, so this is nepotism, really, to be honest. But no, Sam is he's an analyst. He's very well versed in the world of sustainability, and so when I was thinking about this topic, I was like, I should reach out to Sam. And part of the topic is, and Sam just shared this information with me. So far in the year 2024, 19% of vehicles sold in the United States were electrified in some way. That means plug-in hybrids, and battery electric vehicles. It's interesting is that the hybrids account for 10%, the battery electric vehicles 8%, and then the PHEVs 2%. And it's weird because, we've been hearing a lot about PHEVs sort of taking over the market and sort of, surpassing BEVs, but the numbers don't quite add up so far. I think maybe it's a lack of PHEVs on the market. I mean, it's really mostly the Toyota RAV4.
Yeah, well, it's a combination of things. There's actually not that many plug-in hybrids available to buy, and many of them are still available in very limited quantities. Like you mentioned, the RAV4 Prime and the Toyota Prius Prime. Toyota doesn't actually build very many of them, so it's just if you want one, they're actually pretty hard to find. Ford builds a couple of, or actually I think they're down to just one now because they are two. They have the plug-in hybrid versions of the Escape and the Lincoln Corsair. They've discontinued the plug-in hybrid Aviator due to apparent lack of interest. Because I think they sold fewer than 1,000 of those a year for the last couple of years, and there's some plug-in hybrids from some of the German premium brands, but overall not. And also from Hyundai and Kia also sell some plug-in hybrids, and that's about it. There's not a lot. There's not actually as many options as people think. And
that sort of leads into today's topic, and we're going to talk about level 2 charging. And let's stop calling it level 2. Let's just call it AC charging. Because, when you charge at home or you charge, the sort of, I guess, low speed charging or low energy charging, it's AC. That's the system that's the how we're delivering that energy into the battery versus DC, which we all think of with fast charging. So for this podcast today, we're going to just call it AC charging as opposed to using level 2, which gets sort of confusing because there's so many level 2s out in the automotive world at this point. So let's talk about the infrastructure, the charging infrastructure. We talk a lot about DC fast charging. We need lots and lots of DC fast chargers. We need to have them along major corridors. We need to have them in towns. We need to have them out in the middle of nowhere. We need to have them for people who maybe can't charge at home. But the reality is that AC charging, especially for most driving, that infrastructure really needs to be built up. And do you see that? And when you're looking at the world and we're looking at charging, do you feel like AC is sort of being forgotten about?
Yeah, certainly in the public discussion, it is definitely, it doesn't get the attention that DC does. A lot of people have this feeling that they want to basically just replace the gas station infrastructure with DC fast charging, and they want the same kind of user experience we've had with gas stations for 100 plus years. And while DC can get you a lot of the way there, DC charging can get you a lot of the way there, it's not actually probably the best solution if what we're talking about is sustainability and accessibility and equity of charging. For one thing, DC charging is quite a bit more expensive. One of the things that a lot of people have talked about in promoting EVs is that your operating costs go way down because the cost of electricity is way less than the cost of gasoline, and that is true. The electricity costs are generally a lot cheaper than gasoline. But if you are DC fast charging, That's not the case. It's actually, in many cases, it can cost you roughly about the same to DC fast charge an EV as it would cost to put gas in an equivalent vehicle. And so the economics are not great. And there's a number of reasons. The chargers themselves are very expensive. The cost of DC chargers, depending on the power levels, can range from anywhere from $75,000 to $250,000 per charger, which is a couple of orders of magnitude more than AC chargers. And then to charge a vehicle, to have chargers that can pump out up to 350 or 400 kilowatts, that also requires a lot of power coming into that location where the chargers are. If you want to put 8, 4, 8, 10, 20 DC chargers at a location, you need a lot of power. 10 350 kilowatt chargers, if you want them all to be able to run at peak speeds simultaneously, you need 3.5 megawatts of power going into that site. And the number of sites that have that kind of power level available is pretty limited, actually. And so, you've got the costs of doing the infrastructure upgrade to the charging site and the time it takes for that. For AC charging, it's way, way simpler, way cheaper to do.
And one of the things we talk about is, you can charge at home. Like I charge at home, but I'm a homeowner. If you don't own your home, if maybe you're in a rental house or you live in an apartment building, it's not really an option to have like just a level 2 charger like smacked onto the side of your building, unless of course you have underground parking or you have a garage. But for a lot of people, that's just never going to happen. So how does AC charging fit into these sort of scenarios for these people? How does AC charging make their lives a bit easier?
Certainly from a cost standpoint, if you can get access to AC charging, it's going to be a lot better for drivers. One of the things that, again, doesn't get thought about a lot, because we talk about having incentives to get people to buy EVs, but the reality is most people don't actually buy new cars. Only a very tiny minority of overall car buyers or drivers ever actually buy new cars. In our best years in the United States, we've sold a little over 17 million vehicles. I think this year we're probably on track for about 15.5 million vehicles. And we've got 290 million registered vehicles on the road. Every year we sell about 3 times as many used cars as new cars. So when you look at the demographics of new car buyers, they're going to be a little more affluent. They're going to be much more likely to be homeowners and live somewhere where they have access to off-street parking and ability to charge at home. But when you look at the demographics of those that buy used cars, because most people can't afford a new car, then they are much more likely, they're nearly somewhere between 40 and 50% of the rest of the population is living in a situation where they're in an apartment or a condo or even older urban neighborhoods where it may be a single family home, but they don't have a driveway. You go in a lot of cities and older neighborhoods, people don't have driveways. They park curbside. And so we have to come up with solutions for those people to get access to charging. And, we have power going everywhere. The amount of power you need for AC charging is so much less than for DC charging that the capacity of our grid to support that would actually be a lot easier to do that, to roll out a lot more curbside charging. And fortunately, there are things happening that will hopefully make that a little bit easier to do in the coming years, especially with the new J3400 standard.
And let's talk a little bit about retail charging, because I think, right now, if I go to some of these DC fast chargers, they might be near a retail area. But as cars charge quicker and quicker, you're only there for like 10 minutes. That's sort of the deal, 10 to 15 minutes. That's not enough time to go into the store, do some shopping. If you're going to the mall or if you're doing grocery shopping or you're doing all these other things that sometimes take 30 to a few hours, or you're going to see a movie, like, let's talk about how AC charging actually makes way more sense for those locations.
Yeah, I mean, about 80% of daily driving is less than 40 miles a day, which means that people don't need to do a full charge every day. And with AC charging, if you are parked somewhere, plugged into an AC charger or an outlet for, 1, 2, 3 hours, you will easily have a full battery. And if you're doing that on a daily basis or even just a couple of times a week, you will probably have a full battery most of the time. So again, if we make a lot more AC charging available to people, then they can just wherever I mean, our cars are sitting idle 90 to 95% of the time anyway. And if we just have a plug everywhere we go, then just, you get out of the car, you plug it in, you go do whatever you're going to do, whether you're going to go and buy some groceries for 20 or 30 minutes, or you're going to go sit down for dinner for a couple of hours or watch a movie. With that ability to charge, we could easily accommodate far more people, and have everybody be able to charge at a much lower cost and not have to worry so much about range anxiety because the battery is almost always full.
And it's interesting because we're talking about, when you get gas, that is an action. You are getting gas. When you're charging, especially at an AC charger or you're charging at home in these like sort of low speed charging scenarios, you're doing something else.
Yeah,
that's just a byproduct.
You're not sitting there waiting for it.
Yeah, you're like, well, I have to go to, Sephora, or I have to go to a sporting goods store, or I have to go to Walmart, and you just plug your car in, and you don't feel like, oh God, I have to get outside because my car is charging so quickly. You're just like, okay, I'll come back in a few hours because this thing is only charging at 7 kilowatts or 11 kilowatts versus, 350 kilowatts. And it's also better for the battery, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It puts a lot less strain on the battery. Charging it, a couple of 100 kilowatts does put, it generates a lot more heat in the battery that has to be dissipated. So it's not as efficient. So your vehicle is going to have the battery thermal management system is going to be running to dissipate some of that heat that you're building up. You've also got, the heat from the chargers themselves, because a DC charger is taking AC, alternating current from the grid. It's got to convert that to DC and pump that into your battery. And so there's a lot of hardware running in the background. If you go to a DC charger, you and just stand there and listen, you will hear where the boxes are with all the transformers. You'll hear that buzzing, and if you stand by, you can feel the heat coming off of it. So it's not the most efficient process for putting energy into a vehicle.
So we talked a little bit about curbside charging. I was just in Europe last week, and one of the things that I really enjoy about how they're doing their curbside charging is their bring your own cable system. Do you want to talk a little bit about like what are the pros and cons of either having a cable attached to a AC charger on the curbside versus you bringing your own cable?
Yeah, so if you've got curbside, I mean, anywhere you go today in the U.S., pretty much anywhere you go where there's AC charging, there is going to be a cable hanging off of that charger. And if it's curbside, now you've got the problem of you got to get people to actually hang the cable back up. It's usually going to be loose. It's typically got to be long enough to reach the charging port on the vehicle because the charging ports are all over the place. And so the cable itself is going to be, going to tend to be fairly long. You got to loop it up, hang it on a hook or something. And if you don't, people end up running over the cables, or if it's on the edge of the sidewalk, people might be tripping over the cables. So it's a tripping hazard. Or, if there's a bike lane and it's hanging into the bike lane, then there's, problems with that. And there's also the challenge of, in some places we're starting to see cables getting stolen, thieves going and snipping the cables off of chargers to salvage the copper, and just to sell the copper from the cables. So it's not an ideal situation to have all these pedestals with cables hanging off of them. But if we have a system like what they're doing in Europe, where there's just a standard port on there, just like the port on your car, and you just have the cable in the trunk of your car, you have your own charging cable. You'll always have a cable with you. You never have to worry about pulling up to a charger and having either a cable that's been clipped off or somebody has run over the charging connector and shattered the charging connector. So there's a cable, but it's nothing you can't plug it in. So bringing your own cable gives drivers a little more security that all they have to do is plug in. and there's no worries about not being able to find one with a working cable. It reduces the cost of the charger itself. There's less copper required overall. If everybody's just got a cable in their car, you don't have all these idle cables sitting out there. So I think it's a better solution. And with the J3400 standard now supporting 277 volt charging instead of 240 volts charging, that's of course a single phase of a 480 volt three phase circuit. And so now that's going to make it easier. The charging pedestals themselves can be lower cost because you don't have to do that voltage conversion in there from 277 to 240. You can just tap right into the circuits that we already have for utility poles and everything else. There have been some experiments with some pilots with doing curbside charging in various places here in the U.S. Where you use your own cable. I think there was one in Brooklyn that Hyundai was doing with It's Electric, I think was the company, where people could sign up and have a pedestal installed in front of their home or business, and it would just require a small trench through the sidewalk and then tap into the power panel in their home, and then they could, the users would get charged for the electricity. They'd get a cut of that, get an affiliate fee for that. That's one potential solution. And again, with the shift to 277 volts, that could become even easier.
What's interesting is that the part that actually plugs into the pedestal, that's a universal plug. Like they're using it in Asia, they're using it in Europe, and they're going to use it here. The only thing, the other end is where the difference will be in each region. And so that's right. A pretty for OEMs, for people who are making these cables, that's a big deal because it's one less thing they have to worry about as they're making these cables.
Yeah, you can use the same connectors globally on at least on the one end of the cable, and then in Europe it'll be CCS2 on the other end. Here it'll be CC or J1772 or NACS, and then GBT in China. So yeah, it will definitely simplify things from a supply perspective.
And one thing I learned is that if you talked about the cut cable. If you cut a cable on a let's say an installed machine and the cable is part of that machine's just down. It's just unavailable. You can't use it, and it costs a lot of money to replace that cable because you have to get someone out. You have to bring the whole machine down. You got to do all these things in order to do it. Whereas this would be unfortunate, but it might happen. Is someone might cut a cable that's attached to a car, which seems a lot less safe, and I think people would be a lot less likely to do so. But the only time that cable is going to be out is when it's connected to a vehicle, producing current to charge that vehicle. If that, for whatever insane reason, someone decides to cut it, I mean, that's horrible for that owner, but everyone else who's going to use that charger going forward will still be able to use the charger.
Right, exactly. And, I think hopefully, in the case of, if we have people, bring your own cable, instead of cutting the cables, hopefully if someone is, and please don't do this if you're, don't do this sort of thing. But if you're going to do it, just, maybe break the latch and just take the whole cable without cutting the cable. Because then, you might be a little less likely to electrocute yourself. You probably still have some arcing, but, in general, just don't do it. But if they do, it's replacing a cable like that is a lot cheaper than replacing one that is actually hardwired to the pedestal.
Yeah, definitely. So what do you think needs to happen? Does it need to be for folks to sort of understand the importance of widespread AC charging? Because I don't think people really, I think we are still stuck in that I go to the gas station, I get gas in 5 to 10 minutes, and then I leave. And that's sort of a part of, that's how we've been trained for decades. How do we change that? How is it from the people who are charging at home realizing that and then telling everyone? Is it government? Is it you and me? Do we just go around on a road show and we talk to everybody?
I think it's some of all of that. I mean, we need, as we make this transition to electrified vehicles, to plug-in vehicles, we do need to educate the public. Consumers need to have a little better understanding of, how battery charging works, how EV charging works, and especially with DC, because I think if people actually understood better how DC charging works and the fact that it's not a constant flow rate over, as you're charging the vehicle, and understood how much simpler it is and cheaper it is to do AC, I think a lot more people would be willing to go that route, because I think, when you stick the gas nozzle from the pump in your car, it doesn't matter if your tank is bone dry or 7/8 full. The gas is going to flow at the same rate into the tank until it clicks and it's done. And the car is not talking to the charger at all, or to the gas pump at all. So, it's a very simple thing for people to understand. With DC charging or AC charging, but particularly with DC charging, there's this constant communication between the car and the charger, negotiating, how much power the battery can absorb based on its state of charge and temperature and all these other factors, and what the charger is capable of, and if the charger is sharing load with other chargers, all this nonsense. And so it's way more complicated than just plugging it in. And I think if we could do something to educate people a little bit about, at least at a high level, of how charging works, that you've got a charging curve that when your state of charge is low, it starts fairly high and then it tapers off as the battery gets full. Then I think people would, think, oh, okay, well, if I plug into an AC charger, it's a lot simpler. It's going to go at more of a constant flow rate throughout the charge cycle. And, I know my car is going to be sitting around for many hours a day. And if I can park somewhere where there's a charger available, and if we make chargers available everywhere, and we can make a lot more chargers available in a lot more places with AC charging because of the cost differential and the lack of, the reduced need to upgrade the grid infrastructure, then I think people will understand that and start to make that transition.
One of the arguments against EVs is that, well, it's going to bring the grid down. There's this weird scenario where everyone's DC fast charging at 4 p.m. or 6 p.m. Everyone gets off work and they all rush to a DC fast charger to charge at 350 kilowatts. And the reality is that if you charge at home, especially if you have a metered system, you're tiered, you're charging in the middle of the night at midnight. No one's awake. Most people aren't awake, so most people are, you're because your electricity is cheaper. You're paying for, if you can charge and get it cheaper, why wouldn't you?
Exactly. It's pretty easy in the background to set up systems on the vehicle or on your charger at home, to know, when are the times when you get the lowest rates, and to schedule your charging. And because, again, you're not typically, in 90+% of cases, you are not doing a full charge on the vehicle, even at home on an AC charger. Usually within an hour or two, your battery is going to be fully charged. So it's so much easier. You don't even really have to think about it at all in most cases.
Yeah. That's sort of our experience now, is that with our EV is that we rarely go to DC fast charging stations because there's really no need. Yeah. Because you just wake up in the morning, because we plug the car in at night, and it's got a full tank of gas, with quote marks. So, it's the battery is full, like your phone. You get up in the morning, your phone is full, and you go on and you do whatever you do that day.
And in fact, if you're a typical driver, you don't even have to do that every day. I mean, it's probably a good habit to get into, to do it every day. So you're never going to hit one of those days where, I need to go somewhere and I've only got 20% charge in the battery. So it's probably a good habit. But if you're like most people, if you have a pretty regular routine, you could get by with only charging every 2 or 3 days, a couple times a week, and be hunky dory.
Well, thank you so much, Sam. I really appreciate you being on the podcast today.
Oh, my pleasure, Robbie. It's great. Always great to talk to you.
For more information about the evolution of sustainability, head on over to sustainablecareers.sae.org. And if you're not quite ready to add an EV to your household, you can check out our plug-in hybrid explainer video to help bring you up to speed on the hybrid technology and the vehicles. Be sure to subscribe and listen every week on your favorite podcast platform.
SAE International makes no representations as to the accuracy of the information presented in this podcast. The information and opinions are for general information only. SAE International does not endorse, approve, recommend, or certify any information, product, process, service, or organization presented or mentioned in this podcast.